How you doing, guys? This is Eric from secretoftheinternet.com, rulethewasteland.com. This video is about Puerto Rico and how the horrible situation that they're in right now as a result of the recent hurricanes is a good example of the type of real-world shit-the-fan scenarios that can actually take place, and a couple key things that they prove about what you need to do to be prepared for these situations. So obviously when people think about shit hit the fan, they think about these crazy, apocalyptic, cataclysmic, worldwide type events, which luckily are not very realistic. They're almost certainly probably not going to happen, which is good. But the same type of issues can arise in smaller sort of scenarios that are, they're not happening in the entire world, but you still have to deal with the same sort of situations. You could have civil unrest, you could have lack of food or water, shelter, other different sorts of dangers like that, hygiene issues, disease, all sorts of stuff like that. But when it comes down to it, most preparedness is simply about having the things that you need to survive in a situation where that stuff isn't being brought in from the outside constantly like we're used to in our modern society. And that's why Puerto Rico is such a good example of this, is because there's nothing too incredibly crazy going on there. It's just a lot of the infrastructure has been wiped out, so people have to rely on just what they have. And a couple of the things that has shown us specifically is, one, cash is super important. When you talk about stuff like cash and gold and silver, people always say, oh, you can't eat gold. I'm gonna do a whole video on this probably again. I've mentioned it before, but it's just such a stupid mindset. But the whole you can't eat gold, and obviously the same thought could apply to cash and things like that, because they instantly, their mind goes to this kind of Mad Max scenario where Waterworld or something, where money is just not going to be worth anything. But what we're seeing right now, and I'll link to an article in the description box below this video, is that with all the infrastructure wiped out, electrical, internet, people are struggling to get wireless signals or cell signals of any kind because all the towers and everything are destroyed, is that cash has become incredibly important. Now that the initial disaster is over, the hurricane, and people are left there to clean up the pieces, most people still want some semblance of order and are still, interested in there being ordered, interested in being able to buy things, they're interested in being able to sell things and trying to pay people to fix things or whatever, get more food, sell food, whatever. That stuff doesn't change just because there's been a disaster scenario. So now cash has become incredibly important because there's no other way to transact. You can try direct barter and things, but like I mentioned before, there's a lot of issues with direct barter, certainly in a situation like we're seeing in Puerto Rico, where a lot of things are destroyed. You don't just have access to all the different kinds of things that people may need. You need a system for transacting, for storing value, for trading value, things like that. And cash and gold and silver serve those purposes. So that's why I mentioned before the importance of having cash around for the short-term disaster scenarios, either right after even something like an economic collapse, or certainly something after a natural disaster where you don't have electricity or communications. Cash and other ways of transacting are super important, and this proves that. So you guys need to focus on having some way to transact in these situations. Don't just focus on the crazy, out of this world kind of total cataclysmic shit hit the fan scenarios where no kind of money would even matter because you're just running from roving bands of raiders all day. That's just not a realistic preparedness mindset to have. The other thing that we're learning from Puerto Rico is what I've been saying all along, is that you just need to simply prepare for the basics of what you need every day, and then that will cover the vast majority of survival scenarios that you'll be put into. So obviously in Puerto Rico there was a risk of your stockpiles being destroyed by the flooding, or if your building was destroyed or something like that. So if you're in an area where there are certain natural disasters, you need to take these things into account when storing, when building up stockpiles and things like that. So you would need to put your supplies somewhere where water is not going to damage them, some kind of tote, or secure them somehow so they couldn't get washed away if your building gets damaged, things like that. But beyond that specific preparedness for that area, things like water, what does everyone need right now in Puerto Rico? They need food, they need water, they need shelter, they need medicine, they need protection, things like that. Those are the tools, whatever. All the same things that you would need no matter what the situation was. So that's why I don't usually recommend preparing for a specific event, but just preparing for being without outside systems of support, which is exactly the situation that Puerto Rico is in now. Is you just plan to be able to do without outside supplies coming in. If you have all those things already, water or a way to purify it. Puerto Rico is an area where there's plenty of water and everything around. Certainly if you had some sort of desalination and things like that. But you at least need ways to purify it. But certainly water storage is important too. If there were saltwater storm surges, things like that might have contaminated small areas that were otherwise fresh water. There's things to consider, but just having water, having food, having a way to cook your food, making sure you have some sort of shelter, backup shelter, some kind of protection, any sort of hygiene and first aid supplies you might need. That's all the stuff that they need. That's all the stuff that everyone always needs just to survive. So where you are and what you anticipate the disaster being, or the shit hit the fan scenario being, doesn't change that. So those are the two things that we can learn from Puerto Rico: is the importance of cash and some manner of wealth storing and trading in a shit hit the fan scenario, and the importance of, just like I mentioned before, the commonality of disaster, like Jack Spirko would always say, and just you like having the things that you're going to need. That's it. It's pretty simple. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching.